Welcome to Triple Take Cinema. I am Alex, here as always with my co hosts, Dustin and Kyle. And today we are talking Scorsese. Uh, this is part one of a Martin Scorsese two-parter. And I wanted to pick 6 films that are complete blind spots to me. The 3 that we're going to be talking about today are 1973's Mean Streets, 1980's Raging Bull, and 1982's King of Comedy. And I'm also realizing that this is kind of a stealth De Niro Scorsese episode. These being 3 of their big collaborations, and I really wanted to do this two-parter because I've seen a decent amount of Scorsese. I've seen Goodfellas and loved it. Seen Taxi Driver and enjoyed it, and definitely want to revisit it. I've seen a lot of his more recent stuff, The Departed, Hugo. Yeah, definitely some more of his post 2000s work. But I had some big gaping holes in my Scorsese filmography that I wanted to fill, and I wanted to bring you two along for the ride. But before we get into these, and we're going to follow the chronology and go Mean Streets, Raging Bull, King of Comedy, Kyle, tell us about your relationship with Scorsese and whether or not you had a relationship with these 3 films, or like me, you were going in completely blind.
Not completely blind, one eye blind. I liked that you pulled back from saying you loved Taxi Driver because you were concerned about being labeled as a sociopath on public internet waves.
The only reason, the only reason that I
That's the
held my
only
tongue,
reason.
the only reason, absolutely.
I can't say that on air. Jesus. I had seen Raging Bull. I had seen Raging Bull a while ago. All that happened for me a while ago when I started listening to Film Spotting. Raging Bull, I believe, is in the pantheon on that podcast website, what have you. I believe so. So I checked it out then, and I did have an understanding of how I felt about it then. So it's interesting to do this now with like 15 years in between viewings. And I had not seen King of Comedy at all. I had heard of it. I had not seen Mean Streets at all. I would say I'd heard of it. Yeah, my relationship to Scorsese in general is, generally speaking, pretty love-hate. I can go down his filmography and all the ones that he either wrote and directed or wrote or directed. It's amazing because I just had to do that while I was watching these movies to make sure. I don't know. I don't know what I was making sure of, just to check myself and sanity in general. But I was like, wait a second, what? Why? Why do
like
I?
off the hip, what would you say is your favorite and least favorite Scorsese film?
That's a good question.
Oh man,
Off the hip,
off,
and
off,
obviously, like
yeah,
it can be one of these 3 for either of those 2. Like that's fine. I'm just really curious.
yeah. Off the hip, Departed is my favorite,
Okay,
Great choice.
that's probably mine
and
too. I think I saw Departed like 4 times in the movie theater.
yeah, and I will say it's tough for me to choose. It's tough for me to choose between The Irishman and Mean Streets.
Yeah, Irishman is like it's I mean, I feel like late, post well, Irishman and Killers of the Flower Moon are like clearly like Scorsese, where like he is at a point in his existence where I don't think people say no to him at all, or even suggest no to him, and it is becoming less and less beneficial. I feel like the last time that level of excess I feel like worked to a large extent was Wolf of Wall Street. But I think Irishman and Killers of the Flower Moon, there's interesting stuff in both of those, but the execution gets so dragged out that you like fatigue on it before, like you end up fatiguing on the entirety of it, which like
Fatigue
kind
is
of
a really good word. I like the
washes
word you
out the
describe.
yeah, it like washes out the good parts because you're so
Kill,
exhausted by the end of it.
but Killers, and I think we can obviously touch on this, and we certainly will in part one and part two over the whole thing of it, because it's obviously an obsession of his. I will call it an obsession. But Killers of the Flower Moon, I at least like enjoy the story. By the
Mhm.
time I've watched The Irishman, when I'm like 36 or whatever, a couple of years ago, I just don't. And this will come up in this show. I just don't care about gangster movies anymore,
Yeah,
and I think
yeah.
there's something I
Well,
really don't. Yeah,
and I mean, I don't disagree, and I feel like for me, it's kind of a thing where, like, yeah, like some of the classics, like Goodfellas, I'll go back to. I kind of want to go back to it now after watching Mean Streets, and it's always going to be solid and entertaining to me. But like, and same with The Departed. But I feel like for a new gangster movie, like the bar is really high. And again, I feel like there's nuggets in Irishman in particular, smaller nuggets than Killers, that like were interesting, but then it's like over 4 hours, no thanks. And then weird de-aged De Niro like also is a huge like slap in the
yeah.
face kind of a thing too. But that's off topic. I'll say that unless did you have more you wanted to cover, Kyle, or should I give
No,
my
no, no.
background?
Yeah,
Okay,
give
Yeah,
your
yeah.
jump
give
right
your give
in.
your background. Yeah,
I all three of these were blind spots. I heard of all of them. The one I'd heard the least about was Mean Streets, but very familiar with the existence of Raging Bull and King of Comedy. And I would say both of those were certainly Raging Bull was definitely on like I want to watch this someday, because like I don't want to say my dad raised me like to be a huge fan of boxing, but like growing up, like we did play like Fight Night, the video games a lot, and like he would pull me into the living room when ESPN was running an old Ali fight and things like that. So I feel like I have some degree of appreciation for boxing. And then just my Scorsese relationship, I think, is probably similar to the two of you. Most I've seen most of his like post 2000 stuff, starting with Gangs of New York.
Hmm.
mm.
I think really the only ones I'm looking at the list that I haven't seen are I still haven't seen The Aviator and I haven't seen Silence. And then his pre 2000 stuff, these three movies now and Goodfellas was is so like there's stuff that I still want to get to, like Cape Fear, Casino, Bringing Out the Dead, After Hours. Someday maybe I'll watch Taxi Driver. There's enough that I still want to fill out. But yeah, it's definitely like a millennial, base millennial appreciation of stuff that was like in theaters when I was like a teenager, kind of going crazy. Like I recently rewatched Kings of New York within the last year, and I have a soft spot for that movie, even though I think after watching it now for like the seventh or eighth time, I'm like, I can see that this is like not a particularly great movie in some ways, like bit clouded by being like 14 when I first saw it, but I still enjoy it more than some of his other more recent stuff.
I'll wait till the end of the episode to reveal what the other three are going to be, but I'll just give a little teaser that two of the titles that you rattled off, Dustin, for having not seen are going to be on our part two. So
Okay,
excited you'll
cool.
get to check those off. Um, and yeah, let's get into Mean Streets. And before I hear y'all's thoughts on this, I wanted to give just a quick bit of historical context that I was learning about this movie, where Mean Streets was not Scorsese's debut. That was Who's That Knocking at My Door, which was essentially a student film that he made while at NYU, and was followed by a movie called Boxcar Bertha that he was produced by Roger Corman, who's a B movie director. And I don't know about much of either of those two, but I do know that Mean Streets was his first studio film. And I wanted to pick it to kind of give an introduction to where Scorsese started as an auteur filmmaker, where he really, first kind of came onto the scene. And it sounds like I'm going to be more positive on Mean Streets than both of you guys. But before I hear your thoughts, the one nugget I'll tease is that I was very pleasantly surprised by how stylistically confident Mean Streets came across to me, where I think I was expecting it to feel a little rougher around the edges, and maybe that's something that you guys felt. But to me, it felt very, very confident and stylistically assured in ways that I found really exciting that I'm looking forward to getting into. But first, Dustin and then Kyle, let's hear about how Mean Streets sat or didn't sit with you.
I found it boring. Like I just found it really I'll be very brutally honest, like I was distracted during this on my phone a bit, and like I feel like I only digested maybe half to two-thirds of what was going on and was not compelled by that to like stick with it or rewind to catch the things that I missed. And I don't know if it was like it, I think, I mean, I don't, I want to give myself more credit than this, but I don't know that I'm deserving of it. I think part of it was just like the age of it, and not that, you know, early 70s movies can't be entertaining. I just watched for the first time the other week the original Italian Job with Michael Caine, which I think is like 69. So that's older than this. I love plenty of movies from this era, but just like I don't even say it's like, it's not like it was like a bland palette. Like there's colors and stuff like that, but just like the darkness of it all, like it just was very like visually uninteresting to me. Like not not I think it was competently filmed and whatnot, but just visually it didn't spark my interest. And not that that needs to be in a movie, but the story didn't catch me really either. And it just felt like a lot of like mumbling and stumbling around. And so, yeah, I just found it to be kind of a snooze fest. And I think, Alex, when you watched this, you had texted us and said something like, oh, you felt like Mean Streets walked so Goodfellas could run. And I mean, I definitely feel like and that was before I watched it. So I feel like I kind of had that in the back of my head. And maybe that kind of fed into my lack of interest in it. But it definitely feels like, I don't, store brand Goodfellas or Dollar Tree Goodfellas kind of in a way, and not in
Dr.
a
Pibb, Goodfellas.
yeah Sierra Mist Goodfellas or whatever. Not even Dr. Pibb is too mainstream. It's like Mr. Soda Goodfellas or something. Yeah, it just felt like it didn't feel interesting. It didn't seem compelling. I didn't feel like any of the characters were like super interesting. It was fun. Like I love Harvey Keitel. Like watching him young on screen is like cool and compelling. But other than that, it didn't do it for me. Like I'd say of everything we've watched for this podcast so far, this was the one that like was the most uninteresting to me.
Kyle, tell us where you're at, my friend.
Yeah. So I like the phrase you used, Alex. The confidence of the filmmaking so early on in Scorsese's career. I don't disagree that it was very confident. However, it reminds me of the confidence that like a 22-year-old has, where they're like, look at this shit. I'm great at this. I'm amazing. A couple drinks in me, feeling fantastic. And I got that vibe. You know, it was like, it's interesting because I see how Scorsese has evolved his use of music, and how many other directors and filmmakers in general can use music to great effect. And this felt like the movie was trying to let the music set do more of the work than it should have, and maybe even replace some of the work. Or to put it another way, you know, Scorsese loves New York City, as many filmmakers do. And so there was a little bit of, oh, you are, as I'm watching this, I'm thinking you're enamored with and maybe intrigued by the world of gangsters and wise guys and that type of, and this is even a little bit more adjacent to that at times, but like you're enamored with that. You love New York City and you love music. and you decided to just put those all together, and you kind of thought the elements that are inherently contained in those three things could only produce a good movie. And I see what people are saying with the Goodfellas light stuff, and you see how this can lead there. I personally am a Goodfellas hater. I the amount of times, this is one of those things with me and Scorsese, man. The amount of times that I've watched a Scorsese movie, and it is known to be one of the better movies of all time, as rated and all these things, and maybe I shouldn't
And you're
know
just like
that going. I'm
wrong.
just like, what are we doing here? I just like I'm just I was there was I don't know how long it was into Mean Streets. Maybe it was like 25, 30 minutes, and I was like, oh, no character is going to change. And that to me, I don't think you can lay that criticism on a lot of Scorsese movies, but to me, that's what I felt, is that I was just like, it felt like I'm just watching a fishbowl, as opposed to me watching something take place that will either have an impact outside of the characters, or have an impact for one of the characters, or yeah, I don't know. It kind of like I don't know. Like, I don't even know why Robert De Niro blew up that mailbox in the beginning. It just seemed like it
Yeah.
was wanton destruction, and that to me almost feels like a metaphor for the whole movie. Of like, oh well, blowing up a mailbox is inherently interesting, so we're gonna watch that. And like, I am arguably, I would watch someone blowing up a mailbox at any
But you
point.
did. You did.
I certainly did. But like, it was another one of those movies where I'm like, okay, I get it. Like, technically, I'm with it, and I can sort of understand its place in film, especially with who Scorsese became. But I am shocked that this is a movie that people would tell other people to see outside of a
Yeah.
context of like a podcast. You know what I mean? Like, I can't imagine. And then there's like, I recently had a friend watch The Godfather, and he was like, yeah, it just wasn't that great. And like, I can see why someone might say that, but I would really argue against it for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
I don't think it's not like my top 10 or anything in movies, The Godfather, but like, I would argue about that. I would say, nah, here's the things going on that I appreciate. And now here's what I will say. And this is something I will say about every single one of the movies we watched. On top of the technical, uh, the technical abilities on display, especially for a young director, the acting is wonderful, right? Like, I have the ability to be like, I don't care about any of these characters after watching them. That said, like the De Niro, Johnny Boy, the Harvey Keitel, these are, like the actors themselves, and the lines delivered, and the moments, and like, that was all very good. So it's very bizarre to me to watch a movie that has really good music to heighten scenes, to heighten moments, really good acting by people who then went on to do way more of that. You know, well shot, well cut. I even liked the pacing. Such as the events of the film were, right. But like, there was never a. I agree with you, Justin, that I was struggling to get engaged. It was more of the snooze fest, as it were, not quite on the level of the Phantom, but like, I
It
just
just
was like, why do I care about what's happening on
yeah.
screen, despite the fact that it's being given to me in a very nice, polished way?
Yeah. It's like I mean, ultimately it's like the story just isn't interesting. It's not compelling, kind of a thing. Like, I think
Mm-hmm.
I echo, that note of like, I can't see why. And to be fair, I don't feel like anybody. Not that I know a lot of like film snobs or anything, but I don't feel like this movie pops up on like lists of like best like gangster movies or whatever, or anything like that necessarily. I think if you go a layer deeper, it shows up. I mean, I think it's I don't think anybody in their right mind would look at Scorsese's filmography and be like, "This is his best gangster movie." Like you've got
Yeah.
Goodfellas, you've got Departed, you've got Casino. Like there's all these other things that I think people would point to. I think that this movie is. I'm looking at the Wikipedia, and it was inducted into the Library of Congress and the National Film Registry. That was in '97, so that was after Goodfellas and that was after Casino. And I think this movie, like if you're like, oh yeah, I had a Scorsese weekend and I watched Departed and I watched The Irishman and I watched Casino and I watched fucking Goodfellas and they're so great, then it's like, yeah, you should go back and watch this too, because you can see blips of some of that other stuff coming through, and it's the story is the least compelling maybe of all of these movies, but it's like you can see where it kind of stems from and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, like if I'm not into a story in a movie, if I don't find the narrative beats compelling, uh, all those other pieces are kind of worthless. Like you can appreciate them, but you can't come out of the movie saying like, yeah, like I would tell someone else to go watch this movie. For me, in that scenario, in this scenario, this was a hard movie to walk out of and think like am I glad I saw it? Like do I mean, on the surface I don't feel like I wasted my time watching it because we're doing it for the podcast and whatnot. But had I just like had I not been having it on for the podcast, I probably wouldn't have finished it. I probably would have punched out halfway through and put on Goodfellas or something like that, honestly, because that's kind of what I felt like as someone who really likes Goodfellas. Like watching this, I was like, I'd rather be watching Goodfellas or Departed instead of this.
What's really funny about that is I think I texted you guys that comment, Mean Streets walked so Goodfellas could run, when I was only a little bit into the movie.
Okay.
And I have since, I'm excited to crack my knuckles, roll up my sleeves, and give my, what I would
I
say
just want to
is
move on to the next. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
amazing, is a pretty enthusiastic defense of this movie,
Oh boy.
which was my favorite of the three that we
Wow.
watched.
What? What are you
I
saying?
Which,
mean,
Continue speaking.
to be fair, I didn't love any of these that much. So, um,
yeah, and this,
I'm curious where your spectrum goes for the other two because it's all relative, kind of a thing.
sure, no, and we'll get into our rankings in a bit, and I did enjoy all three of these to varying degrees. Raging Bull, I found the most difficult sit, the most difficult experience to get through, but to offer some counter perspectives to some of the critiques that both of you raised. Dustin, you're talking about kind of the lack of visual interest kind of in this. And I just think about scenes like when they're in Tony's bar and it's got that like deep, deep, red crimson that's just popping off the screen. And let me even take a step back and start with I think this movie has a knockout of an opening sequence where you've got Harvey Keitel kind of waking up from this nightmare with the Scorsese voiceover where he's talking about, you don't make up for your sins in church, you make up for it in the street. You're panning through Charlie's apartment. You're seeing the central character conflict that's going to drive this movie, which is Charlie's conflict of faith. And I agree that the narrative stakes here are very low. They're very in the background. But to me, the character stakes and the drama of, is Charlie going to be brought down by his weird need to be a martyr for Johnny Boy's ticking time bomb of a character, was really compelling. But back to the opening scene, and then you've got the music, which I agree
I did
does,
love the soundtrack for this. Like, I
it does a lot of heavy lifting, but I think the way it's edited and the way it's paced with the rhythm of each scene is just so perfectly done that I was giddy watching it.
mm,
I loved the you've got the Ronettes doing "Be My Baby" set to that opening title montage, and it's the Super 8 footage of Charlie in Little Italy, like having these big life moments where there's a birthday party, there's a baptism, and there's just so much warmth and affection and camaraderie for these characters that Scorsese conveys with that kind of grainy Super 8 footage where it feels like you're watching home movies. And I think this movie is really strong as it's a hangout movie. It reminded me of something like American Graffiti, where you're just hanging with these guys, you're seeing their slice of life, and I enjoyed all that. I loved the scenes at Tony's bar where you're seeing Johnny Boy and Charlie kind of riffing and shooting the shit and going back and forth about why Johnny Boy doesn't have the money to pay Michael. And there's an organicness to that scene and the way it unfolds where you're just watching these two great young actors kind of riff and kind of improv with each other. And I found that electric and really, really compelling to watch. And I did struggle a little bit in the first third with that lack of narrative stakes and that lack of, what is the momentum really driving this forward? And I think it started to get more stakes and more urgency when we meet Charlie's Uncle Giovanni at the restaurant. And it's revealed that Charlie wants to be, in his mind, a big shot and open up this restaurant that's going to be frequented by all the gangsters. In his relationship with Teresa, who's the woman he's in love with, seeing, who it's revealed is epileptic. And I think there's compelling drama there with Uncle Giovanni considering her a social pariah for having epilepsy and, you know, kind of saying that Charlie should have nothing to do with her. And I find the ticking time bomb of Johnny's character was compelling to me. I think De Niro's fantastic as that character. He's got this crazy eyed charisma. Talking about the music and the scenes, I've gone back in YouTube and watched the entrance where Johnny Boy walks into the bar with the Rolling Stones Jumpin' Jack Flash like 5 or 6 times because I think it's just a perfectly edited and paced scene. I feel similarly about Dropkick Murphys in The Departed, where I freaking love that intro because of how well the music syncs up with the action. And with this scene, I just love the way the music syncs up with the Stones, with the slow motion, with the character dynamics, where Charlie's monologue even says like, something like, gee, I ask for like salvation and then he walks into my bar or something. So you've got Tony's bar basically being this version of hell for Charlie's character with the glowing red and representing like the temptation of this life of crime that's pulling away from his relationship with God. And I did find some of that stuff a little maybe surface level, a little cliche, like the mobster with a crisis of faith. But I thought there was so much that just felt genuine and real about Charlie as a character that I bought it even if I had seen those beats before in other movies. I love the way it portrayed Little Italy, where I just enjoyed hanging out in those spaces. I loved hanging out in that pool hall where the brawl happens. There's this great shot where the camera kind of pulls back and you see all the lights of Little Italy, and you see it's just this narrow strip in the island of Manhattan in New York. And I appreciate what that characterization does for this movie and these characters, where it's like they are so steeped in their little bubble that going to Brooklyn at the end when they're trying to flee, feels like they're going off the edge of the earth. So I just love the way that this is a hangout movie where character and action, are a little looser. They're not driving with that, you know, crazy thumping beat that a movie like The Departed has. But yeah, I just loved relishing in the craft that Scorsese employs here. And, even though these guys are kind of low time hoods and kind of losers with aggrandized self importance. I enjoyed hanging out with him, and I enjoyed hanging out with this movie.
See, it's interesting that I think something that when you mention The Departed or whatever, like there is a sense of, and obviously it's a much different movie, a much different film, narrative, all that stuff. But like, there's this sense of, I can't think of the exact word I'm trying to think. I mean, I'm trying to think of, but it's just I am always on edge in The Departed, right? Like I'm on edge in this way where I'm like, what is going to happen next?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if this movie had that, I would have really liked it a lot more because it kind of felt like, I think this is something that actually it all three of these movies for me kind of lacked a little bit, is just that level of tension that keeps me really locked in. And yeah, I mean there was always that we could get into a fight, someone could do something crazy, and then everyone's gonna be fighting again. They destroyed like 17 bars in this movie. But yeah, I didn't like the tension there, even with a character like a Johnny Boy, who's supposed to be, kind of this big wild card in a lot of ways. I just didn't have that like tension um, when it came to a lot of it. So I mean, I see what you're saying about like the hangout and the kid, like just kind of watching them do their thing. It was enjoyable. I mean, that's the internal character struggle there with Harvey Keitel and stuff. But yeah, just like without that tension, I couldn't go from scene to scene and really invest. So I get what you're saying about those things, and there are some nice moments especially when it comes to the music. There's definitely some nice moments when it comes to the music. But yeah, for me, this is like I'm happy I watched it because I think it is. I mean, just like I don't know, I'm happy I watched it. Like I'm happy I've listened to some Beethoven and some Mozart. You know what I mean? Like you gotta engage with the art. You know what I mean? And I think Scorsese is someone that can make incredible movies, and so there's really anyone who's done that consistently a couple of times. I think it's merited to see almost anything they do. But yeah,
I'm
yeah,
curious, where did you guys both stream this?
YouTube TV.
Yeah,
Alex?
I think Amazon Prime. I think I rented it for a couple bucks and
Okay.
watched it that way.
Because
What
I
about
pulled
you?
it. I used Hoopla, the streaming program like your library probably has access to. I know Alex yours does. Because we have the same library. Well, county library system. I'm kind of wondering. I'm not that it would have dramatically changed my experience, but I mean, like the version, like looking it up, it sounds like there's like Criterion did a sort of 4K restoration. That's probably not what was streaming, or no, 4K. Yes, 4K did a sorry, Criterion did a 4K restoration and Blu-ray almost a year ago to the date. Um, I'm just wondering if the version that I streamed was like a lower, like just HD versus like like a lower resolution version because it
Sure,
was
just
it
in
was
terms of
pretty beat
clarity.
up. Yeah, it does sound like a lot of releases of this just use the original mono track, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I'm just wondering if, like, the version I had was pretty rough. So I wonder if that maybe contributed a little bit to my visual dissatisfaction with it, just the way it, like, not stylistically, like the way it literally looked on screen just was not great.
Sure,
I wonder if
that's
that factored
interesting.
in a little bit, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, because I wonder if your version was slightly maybe muddier or less
Yeah.
crisp than the other versions that could be out there. It's
Mhm.
It
really
could, yeah,
interesting.
that
And
could have had a big effect because it's a very dark movie
Yeah.
visually. Like it's
Yeah.
yeah.
totally. One thing I'm curious about for both of you guys is how you thought about some of those scenes that feel a little bit more removed from the rest of the plot. Because I totally agree with your point, Kyle, about this lacking that kind of, sense of tension you do get from something like The Departed or even Goodfellas. But for me, that was another thing that was a feature rather than a bug of these scenes that were kind of these little vignettes of 1970s life in Little Italy, where, for example, we get that scene where they go to their buddy acquaintance who's a Vietnam vet, and he kind of freaks out and attacks that waitress or other patron. I'm not sure what her deal is, but I thought that was very kind of poignant and surprising, and almost like a little mini story happening in itself. I also really cracked up at the scene where Michael scams those two kids who are trying to buy fireworks, and basically just pockets their 20, which should have been 40, but they take the 20 and they're like, oh, let's go see a movie. You could have removed any of those scenes from the film and it wouldn't have impacted the overall plot, but I enjoyed the texture they added, and I'm just curious if you know what you guys made of those scenes that almost felt a little bit more isolated from the rest of the plot, such that there was a plot. It's a pretty plotless movie.
I barely remember those scenes, so I think that speaks to just how like checked out I was from this. Yeah, I think I mean the fireworks one I remember, which I think I can see why that would be if in your case, Alex, where you enjoyed this movie, I can see why that is like part of the broader picture because you're kind of viewing it as more of a. I think what it sounds like what you enjoyed about this is this more like slice of life perspective, and like I mean that's kind of really I think what is ultimately what Kyle what you were saying about like that lack of tension I think comes from the fact that like when I think of Goodfellas, when I think of Departed, to at the to just overly compare to like other gangster movies that Scorsese has done, even The Irishman, which I think The Irishman fails in this regard too. Like this one does, where like there is no Departed for me is like the central tension is these two rats on both sides of the law enforcement criminal thing and that happening. Goodfellas is him, how it's going to end. And so like everything that leads to that and what happened, it just ratchets all the way up. But the Irishman in this are just kind of like the Irishman is like a long-winded version of this in terms of like the chronology it covers. And this is just like yeah like this is just like their existence. There's not any like anything. It feels like the kind of thing where you could have like rewound or fast forwarded like 5 years in their lives and assuming one of them didn't get killed from some errant thing happening or another, that what happened here could have happened 5 years later or 5 years before. But I mean, I know like Johnny Boy's young, excusing those logistics kind of a thing, that it just was like, yeah, this is just, this window of time. And for me, like there are movies that show that are actually really galvanizing and fascinating and enjoyable, but this just felt like I don't care kind of a thing. And so like those moments that are outside of the central story arc they're trying to tell, however thin that is, feel even less relevant and less poignant. It's more like why are you wasting my time? Like give me these couple minutes back and like get back to the larger story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, that's a fair read. Kyle, where are you at?
Yeah, I mean, it is like I said, add it to the list of the Dustin Kyle agreement. It's very. I if I'm trying to be if I'm trying to really put myself in your viewing shoes, Alex, I see why those scenes provide that kind of color and that kind of extra fabric to the weave
There's also a
of this.
lightness to them and a levity that you don't always get in other Scorsese movies that I enjoyed.
It's true. It is true. But yeah, they didn't land for me because I wasn't really into the characters. And so that to me is really what it is. Like for those scenes for me to land, to have them be like removed from the narrative or the plot or the kind of the flow of the movie, I guess maybe is a better way to put it. I really have to I want to see what the like I want to be interested in the character enough to see how they react in this totally different area of the world. And yeah, it just doesn't land for me because I have not seen anything in the characters so far in the movie when a lot of those scenes happen where I am intrigued or think of them. I think they try to accomplish it with Harvey Keitel's character, sort of some multi-dimensionality, but I mean, ultimately, I don't think it works, and so it's more. Those scenes are more like this is just what this fish looks like, and like no matter what barrel they put him in, the fish stays the same. And so yeah, they just kind of lacked the punch because for me they didn't tease anything out of the characters that I didn't already know. And in a lot of ways, like this movie is just about like New York and this world. And so it's weird to have those it's a little weird to have those scenes when I don't feel like I don't know. They actually felt out of place, even though I did appreciate like I mean, just in terms of the levity and the breaking up of some stuff. Like you said, I did appreciate the taking the kids' money and going to the movies type of thing. But there's a bizarre sense of nihilism in this movie that I think makes the opening scene feel a little hollow to me, or just not fully realized. I guess I don't know. Like you said, that character drama that Charlie's character is having, it didn't have enough body to it for me to be interested in some of those offshoots as much as you were. Yeah.
No, totally. I think that's fair. And this might be a good pivot to talk about engaging with characters and get into Raging Bull because yeah, this was such an interesting watch for me. I think because I've heard for so long about the heavyweight, critical reception this movie has received and like the towering place it holds in cinema, where one of the best movies of the 80s, one of Scorsese's all-time masterpieces. And I really struggled with Jake LaMotta as a protagonist, and I
Mm-hmm.
struggled to spend 2 hours with him, even with the technical mastery that Scorsese brings as a director and that De Niro brings as a performer. And I think this might be one of those things where this is a reflection of where I'm at as just a member of the film going audience, where I don't know if I need another masterpiece about toxic masculinity and about like, this kind of, a jealous, abusive asshole. Like there's so much pathos and depth being wrung out of this character and not this character, this real human being, because this is based on Jake LaMotta's autobiography. Um, and it's just so beautifully wrought, but I just fucking hated spending so much time with this guy. And he creates this prison for himself, and we can kind of analyze it as a character study. We can analyze its technical achievements, which are many. I loved the look of this. I love the sound design. Those fights were brutal and
Mm-hmm.
beautifully edited, and I loved watching them. And I love the idea that each fight is more of a reflection of Jake's psychological state in that moment than they are like a sports drama where you're invested in the outcome. It's really, what does the fight reveal about Jake's character? I really appreciated and liked that. But yeah, I wrestled with this one and would love to hear what you guys think before we get into kind of the nitty gritty.
Yeah, I mean, this was my experience when I watched it the first time as well. I was like, I turned it on and it started, and pretty quickly I was like, oh yeah, this is just a movie where he kicks the shit out of everyone around him, including, geez, look at this guy, including, like, just all the women and all, like, and all the men. I mean, it just, like, it was, there was never, like, I understand the fighting scenes, and I think there's something, and this is just going to be one of those moments where I'm just at this disconnect with Scorsese, where he finds these pockets inherently interesting to himself, and sometimes when we're aligned, it's incredible, right? Like, it's amazing, and then, and the one in this movie is Fighters, and I think similar to New York, Los Angeles, movies about movies, there's these things that, like, movie people tend to gravitate to as something that, because of, I think about, like, The Wrestler, and I think about, like, Million Dollar Baby, and I think about all, like, Warrior. There's something about a fighter character that a lot of people find inherently interesting because they just can't imagine that someone would want to do that for their life. And for me, I have that with climbers. I don't climb because I find that I don't, for the same reason I don't bungee jump. I don't climb, leaving out the athletic abilities required for that activity. I don't do it. And but that said, I will watch every climbing documentary I can get my hands on. I will watch movies about climbers. I will watch movies about people climbing Everest. I've literally watched 15 documentaries on people climbing Everest because I'm like, what is the deal with these people, man? And I think that's something about fighters that I think Scorsese was interested in with LaMotta. Like, you read this book, and I've never read the book. I'd actually be curious to read it because I don't think it probably wouldn't take that long, or I'd maybe get some more insight into this character. But, like, the character lacked depth. It was much more of just like a lightning bolt through the narrative of, this is what's going to happen, and he's going to destroy all the people around him. And because of that, there wasn't really any surprises. I didn't think they did enough with the throwing of the fight scene. I know that when he throws it, like, he's throwing the fight in the ring, like, the way that looks is obviously, like, the way that looks is not how you would want a fight where someone is throwing it to look. It doesn't look good. Things don't go well in the back end, type of thing. But, like, that's the moment that I really wanted more from, to kind of, and I mean, you're working with an autobiography, so it's not like you're making up a character that you can necessarily move in the way that you find most interesting. But I thought it was wild how much time you spend with the character in all these moments, and there's this big moment where he's being asked to throw a fight, uh, and he does, and it just, I don't know, that should have been a much bigger part of that character's kind of downfall, or what. I don't know, but the amount of time, yeah, the toxic masculinity stuff. I think, I don't even know if it would have been profound then. You know what I mean? Like, there was just a lot of that stuff going on, and in a way that's just difficult to watch. I think about, like, when I go back to, like, The Hustler, and how much I love The Hustler, but how that's also a movie from that time where a man is just kicking the shit out of a woman constantly. And it's difficult to watch. And it's also difficult to watch kind of knowing that it's coming. You know what I mean? Like, when he starts to go down one of those holes of, like, oh, what's she with? Who's she been with? What are you saying? Why did you say that thing? Why did you say it this way? Yada, yada, yada. Again, like, De Niro's acting is incredible. Pesci's great. Every character is executing their 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 acting job phenomenally. But it's just another one where I don't care, and I almost want it to end when he goes to jail, but then he comes back out and more terrible stuff is done by the guy, and he's just sad. Like, it's just very, very, very sad without really any moment of redemption. That's what it is. There's not a moment of redemption at all, like, not even a hint of one. And so I think it is a difficult ask to watch someone destroy themselves over the course of 30, 40 years and over 2 hours, no matter how beautifully some scenes are shot, no matter how great the acting is. I think it's a tough watch, and I don't understand. I think there's something to those fight scenes that we don't have an ability to understand viscerally. We can understand it intellectually as to why they were such a technical achievement, but because of what we have available, what have had available to us for most of our lives in terms of like graphics and I don't know, just the way action scenes are shot. I just think there's something that we can't access because it wasn't new to us when we saw it. You know what I mean? So
I I
yeah,
kind of disagree with that last time. I feel like I can't think of another. I mean, not that I have a. I've, s- I haven't seen any of the Rocky movies. I've seen scenes, clips from the Rocky movies, but I haven't seen any Rocky movie start to finish. But I feel like the way these fight scenes were shot, like if I mean, I can't think of anything else like it. Like it's like because I was like, oh, like my first blush on that piece of it was like why does this feel so different in such a cool way? And my first thought was like, oh, well, they're not doing, like the jump cuts and stuff that they do, but there's plenty of jump cuts in there. Like it's jumping around quite a bit, but it's just presented in a way that feels very isolating. Like I feel like the way that it's filmed is like you feel like you're very present in the ring with De Niro and whoever he's boxing in a way that is like you're not present as an audience member who's dropped down with a camera like you might be in like Will Smith's Ali movie or something like that. Like it literally feels like you're standing in the ring like the ref would be or whatever, like seeing these hits happen and things like that.
I thought that was really effective too. The claustrophobia you feel during those
Yeah,
scenes.
because you can, like the background's all kind of covered in smoke and whatnot, and it kind of takes you in. Like even the sound is like the audience cheers are like muted when they're showing that action in the ring, and in a couple scenes when they like cut to stuff happening ringside, like it's louder and whatnot. That's my dovetail to say, like, I agree with everything you just said, Kyle, as far as like the story goes. Like I found I liked this the most out of the three because I found the boxing sequences to be absolutely beautiful and just like so fantastic to watch. Like I wish the whole movie was that. I found the character to be abhorrent and uninteresting, and to your point, there's no redemption arc or anything. I mean, I'm thinking back to Five Easy Pieces, and like I think, I can't remember. I think Kyle, you didn't care for that,
no,
but Alex and I did, if I recall correctly. And I think for
Yep.
me, what I liked about what I liked to hate about that was that Nicholson's character in that he never gets redemption. He's not deserving of it, but there's multiple points where it feels like he's about to do something even minutely redeeming, and then he like goes the opposite direction, and there was none of that here at all with Lamada. Like he was just a piece of shit through and through. Like and the fact that like the story's not told entirely chronologically, so we get those clips of him 10-15 years down the road, when he's the nightclub owner and stuff like that, and you can still like he's still a piece of shit, but he's like just out of shape and like full of himself piece of, you know what I mean? Like the fact that we see that fast forward interspliced in periodically just tells you that like, yeah, he's not gonna get any better. He's not gonna like learn his lesson. And then we see that come through multiple times when he's beating up on his wife, and then he goes to apologize and she like acquiesces and whatnot. Either, well, not so much his original wife, but the young one. And that's, I mean, cliche and sadly true to life, I feel like, for many people, but like that's false redemption, right? We know when we see that that's bullshit and that he's lying, but there's not even any other experiential kind of thing where you see like, oh, is he gonna redeem himself, or is he gonna get a true, is he redeeming himself just by seeing the error of his ways, or is he going to be knocked down literally or figuratively so hard that he like understands he needs to come up with a different approach. And even when he like goes to jail and shit like that, you still there's it's not hard enough of a fall for him to like feel the need to change his path. And so I found, yeah, of these three, like this, like I had said at the beginning, like this was probably the one that I was like most interested to watch because I felt like I was missing something, and visually speaking, I'm glad I did. Because I can't think of any other movie that feels this way. And in the black, like I love the choice to have it all in black and white, except for some of those colorized sequences when they're, you know, living their lives or whatever, which I thought was kind of fun, and took me
Kind
out of
of
it
the
for a
like
second.
the home movie footage that
Yeah,
they show.
yeah. Um, like I think the black and white was such a brilliant choice for this because it paints it as a period piece in a different way, and it looks just gorgeous. But
Yeah. Talking
uh,
about like visual texture, it's off the chain in this movie. The
yeah,
way that you can like see the blood and the sweat and all the way that all that looks in that monochrome black and white is just so freaking
yeah.
cool.
And I mean, as a theme with Mean Streets, as you put it, Kyle, like everybody's, you know, firing on all cylinders performance wise, like just phenomenal, like no notes. I thought Pesci was fucking brilliant, like everything, like just amazing.
Yeah, nominated
Speak,
for best supporting actor for this movie. Didn't get it, but deserved the
yeah.
nod.
Speaking of performances, though, I want to give myself credit. I spotted a young John Turturro. This was his first film role. He had a non-speaking part earlier on in the movie when they're at a party, and LaMotta goes to sit at a table and sees his soon-to-be wife, Vicky, across the room or whatever. John Turturro was sitting at the table, and I was like, "Is that fucking John Turturro?" And sure enough, I mean, he was on screen for 20 seconds, didn't say a word or anything, and I was like, "I saw him, I knowed it," and I found it on Wikipedia, and I was like, "Yeah, hell yeah!" Like I knew I recognized him. But yeah, like it's it's more frustrating for me when you watch a movie where you're like, yeah, everybody is doing not just their best work, they're truly doing phenomenal work. And then visually it looks phenomenal. But there's just like there's nobody to root for here. There's nobody to like care about in this story. And and if you're gonna have a story that is absent of a protagonist to root for, then you have to have an antagonist that is at least surprising in some ways. And I feel like that's kind of what Jack Nicholson was in Five Easy Pieces for me, is that like I thought, like I said, I thought multiple times, oh, he's gonna like show that he has a little bit of a heart or a soft side. But there's none of that here. And you know, Jake LaMotta being the focus of it, it's like it's anybody else that could have had a more positive arc is, you know, kind of outshined by that. I'm I don't have any interest in reading the book, but like I'm really curious like how accurate this is to the book, because it's a pretty damning portrait of oneself. And so if he felt comfortable putting pen to paper to tell this story of himself, that's interesting to me to know if he, you know, how he perceived himself when he wrote this, of like, yeah, like I was a fuck up and I did this shit, and like let me just speak truth to it. Or is he like, this is just how I, like this is the role I had to be, like live with it or whatnot, kind of a thing. I don't know, but um that's kind of interesting to me to think about the fact that he wrote the book this is based on.
That's why
Yeah.
that's why reading it is like like something I'm interested in, is because like, oh, maybe the redemption is there, maybe the
Mhm.
self reflection is there, maybe the moments of clarity or understanding are there, and I kind of think because he spent his life getting the shit kicked out of him that it's unlikely, and that the book was
Mhm.
written as a way to continue to capitalize on the fame he had because he was broke. This is all a hunch, but that's kind of, you know, like it doesn't. Yeah, I don't know, and I think that, you know, those scenes where he's talking to himself before he's going to go on stage, really hit home the like lack of self-awareness that this guy has. And the only time we
Yeah.
even get anywhere close to that is when he's punching the wall in the jail and crying. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I
so
mean,
yeah,
that's when you get that self-hatred and that self-flagellation that you see him acting out in the ring throughout the rest of the movie. And I've been trying to kind of see this movie through the way that some other critics, other commenters have appreciated it. And the things I keep seeing people comment on are the ways that the boxing scene, kind of like how I mentioned earlier, the ways that the boxing scenes reflects where where Jake is at emotionally. And to me that still felt a little thin and insubstantial. We're talking about, how do you how do you engage with a movie protagonist? And I don't think I need my protagonist to be likable or need to be someone who has a redemption or even has like a moral arc in the sense of learning a lesson. But you guys have both made some really good points. There needs to be gestures at movement and momentum. There needs to be surprise and intrigue, like you were saying, Dustin, with Jack Nicholson in Five Easy Pieces. For me, it's important to have there be some kind of peeling back of the onion where I feel like different scenes are showing me different facets of that character and where I'm getting a greater understanding of their depth. And I think the ways that this movie tries to accomplish that are with scenes like you have De Niro in the kitchen with Pesci and with his second wife, and Vicky is saying how his opponent is such, he's a pretty boy, and that ignites his jealousy, and from that moment where it's going to end up, and the dramatic tension is released when he beats the shit out of that guy in the ring and bloodies his face, and you've got the mobster saying to the other mobster, he's not so pretty anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a way where you see that dramatic beat played out in the ring, but it still felt, yeah, just thin and a little bit one note in terms of like, okay, this guy is really jealous and he doesn't know how to process his emotions. The only way he can process his feelings is by beating the shit out of other people, whether that's opponents in the ring or his loved ones, his spouse, his brother. And I appreciate the craftsmanship and the intent, but to me it just lacks that depth, that turning the gem or peeling back the onion where you get a different facet of this character. It's like, nope, he's acting out his jealousy and it's being portrayed in this really nuanced, poignant way, but the emotions that it's analyzing are still one note.
yeah, and Scorsese seems to really like self-destructive characters, like in general. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of that. But I think the more he does, the more interesting those characters become. Generally speaking, on his filmography. And luckily, he was working with great people to begin with, and he continued to work with great people his whole career. He still does. So yeah, yeah. It's and again, I think it is interesting. Like I'd love to see this movie without anyone telling me that it's one of the greatest movies ever made. You know what I mean? Like I would, I just, I want. I'm never going to get it, but it's one of the reasons I don't really watch previews. You know what I mean? I just want as little information as possible when I start a movie. And yeah,
Yeah, I will
yeah,
say I definitely want to rewatch this at some point. I'm probably going to wait a minute, but there are just times where you're not on a movie's wavelength, and I think there's enough like visual brilliance, acting, technical achievement to warrant a revisit of this, and maybe I'll come away even more frustrated and kind of repulsed by what I see on screen. Maybe it'll click more, but I think it's definitely one that I'm excited to revisit in a minute because it is a rough sit. Um, but I'm glad we got into it. Should we pivot to our third and final De Niro Scorsese collaboration with King of Comedy?
Yes,
Yeah.
do
Yeah,
it.
and I like this a lot. This was another uncomfortable sit, but for me, it was kind of delightfully uncomfortable. It was cringe, cringe cinema of the highest caliber, where I just, I really, I felt that tension that was lacking in some of those other movies for me, or at least in Mean Streets. And you know, I'll collect more of my thoughts on what I enjoyed about this, but just broad surface level gut reaction reading. Dustin and Kyle, what did you think of Kings of Comedy? King of Comedy.
I This is one that I feel like I want to rewatch at some point. Because I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I found it. I'm not a big Jerry Lewis fan, so like that kind of draws on me. Though I feel, I mean, to be fair to him, he is like not Jerry Lewis in this movie. Like he's very like not the Jerry Lewis that always annoyed me, seeing like the original Nutty Professor and stuff like that. I shouldn't even say that because I thought he did a really good job in this. Yeah, I find it. I thought the idea was really good. Like, and I think De Niro turned in a great performance. But I'll leave it at that for now. Kyle, what was your first your top
Yeah,
level thoughts?
yeah, man. I like this movie. Certainly the most of the three. It was one that I thought I had seen, but I had not. And I honestly, I think I thought I had seen it because of the bizarre stand-up comedy stuff that Jake LaMotta does. I think I had kind of conflated some of those
Mm-hmm.
aspects in my head in the past, but so I had not seen this at all. So this is a total blind spot, really. I mean, I appreciated it. I liked. I thought I thought the story was interesting, and I did feel that tension that I didn't really feel in the other two movies. That kind of kept me there, wondering what would happen next. I thought it, like there was. I almost wished the character was a little bit better at being sneaky about trying to like get in with Jerry Lewis. Do you know what I mean? Like, I guess I just wish that there was a little bit more savviness to that character in that scene where, they conspire to have someone get into the car and he's talking to all the receptionists and he's having the conversations with the programming people. And I wanted a little bit more from there because I guess it never yeah, I liked this movie. I liked watching it. I thought it was interesting. I really didn't know very. I mean, I don't even know if I've seen any Jerry Lewis movies or any Jerry Lewis. Like I very little familiarity there. I do agree. I think the acting was very good. I think he was very good. I think De Niro was good in this. I will say though, like those are my surface level thoughts. And then we'll hear more from Alex. Then I'll go more into De Niro.
Yeah, I have also no real relationship with Jerry Lewis, and but I kind of got the character that Jerry Langford, his analog in this film world is supposed to be. It's a Johnny Carson, it's a Jay Leno. Like, I liked how kind of oily he was. He's kind of like, just a little bit greasy, just a little bit slimy, like, interpersonally as a talk show host. I feel like that was effective. I thought he did a great job at showing how kind of miserable the view is from the top and how he has all
Mm-hmm.
these things that Rupert Pumpkin is pursuing so single-mindedly, and he's clearly not a happy guy, and clearly has a lot of like, you know I just thought he communicated that well as an actor. His kind of disdain for his fans, his contempt at having to deal with all of these people and be up at the top. And I think De Niro's great here, and I think he's great at weaponizing his charisma to kind of create this like anti-charisma for this character. And he's just likable enough where he kind of fools all the people he interacts with initially for a couple of minutes, where he comes across like a facsimile of a functioning human being, where he's a little charismatic, like yeah, he's kind of needy and nervous and like a little off-putting, but like he's okay, he's likable. And then those other characters see like the depths of his delusion and the
Mm-hmm.
depths of his narcissism, and they start becoming more and more revolted by him. And that's kind of a trick that the movie employs several with the secretary in Jerry Langford's office, who he tries to kind of worm his way into and get a meeting with. I just thought that was very effective. That like slow reveal that the other characters have to like, wow, this guy is not all there. And I think that was effective because of De Niro's like how finely calibrated this performance was. And I think you really see that in there's an early scene where we're cross cutting between Rupert Pupkin's delusion of his fantasy of what it would be like to be best buddies with Jerry Langford and go out
Mm-hmm.
to dinner with him, and Jerry's confiding in him, and Jerry's like like you know only you can like know my material. And when he's with Jerry in the fantasy scenes, he's the De Niro that we all know and love. He's like confident, he's charismatic, he's smiling, he's laughing. And when you cut back to Rupert Pumpkin in his mother's basement with the cardboard cutouts, his laugh is way too big. His like eyes are kind of wild and nervous. I just thought that was a great way of like contrasting within one performance how he perceives himself and how he actually comes across. And I did think that those scenes where he's trying to infiltrate Langford's office were a little bit fatiguing in the way that we've talked about Scorsese can be fatiguing when he's going all in on excess and
Mm-hmm.
like, really trying to immerse you in, you know, how unlikable a character might be, or it just, yeah, there was a fatigue there that warmed me a little bit. But I think once he kidnaps Jerry Langford, things pick up steam again. And I thought the tension of, is this guy a funny comedian or isn't he a funny comedian? What is his set actually like? I thought that was really intriguing. And I thought it was kind of a very darkly funny reveal that his comedy, he what the secretary told him was true. He's got decent chops. He's got good timing because he memorizes all this shit. But the content of his comedy is just, boilerplate abusive childhood. And he's kind of painfully average. And I thought, again, that was another really darkly funny satirical joke that for all of his narcissism, all of his delusions, you know, this guy is not, clearly a once in a generation talent, and he doesn't want to work his way up from the bottom. He thinks he should just be able to leapfrog over everything, and that kind of makes him terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
He's a psychopath. He's a very scary character, but it's kind of hidden behind this hapless, nervous, goofy guy. And I thought that was all really effective and darkly funny.
Yeah, I feel like what what I find most compelling about De Niro's performance here, you kind of nailed it, is that like he clearly is delusional, and we see that manifest in many ways. But like the way he presents and engages with people is like so earnest, and like that, like it's almost like he. I mean, you wonder if he even realizes he's delusional. I mean, that seems like a weird question to ask, but like, does he even he believes it all so much, and like and plays it through to the end, right? Like it's like there's no break in his sanity in terms of what's going on, even when he kidnaps Jerry Langford. Like he maybe he understands like that things have transitioned or whatever, but we never really get like a clear view of that. And so yeah, like it's a different level of psychopathy that he's not outwardly malicious and even veiled by pretending to be a normal human or something. I'm really stumbling on my words here, but I think it was just like really compelling to see how he portrayed this character. I wouldn't call him likable. He's not necessarily likable. He's more annoying than anything,
Right.
but he's not inherently unlikable, at least at first blush. And he feels like he's affable enough that, to your point, Alex, that everybody he interacts with feels like, oh, if I just like give him the time of day, that's going to be enough to satiate him. And obviously that is like the opposite of what you should be doing with him, because giving him the time of day, he thinks that you're telling him that you want to be BFFs and and like
Right.
cohabitate together and live together and all, you
Right.
know,
That's
the
Langford's mistake in the beginning that sets this whole thing off, is that he does think, oh, by just engaging with him just a little bit, it'll satisfy him enough to go,
yep.
scurry off, and exactly
Yeah.
the opposite happens.
Yeah. I do think something that was a little jarring to like, it took me like one or two times to like catch on to when the delusions were happening and he thought he was having the conversations with Langford, because like they had him in like they're like the scene in Langford's office that was he was imagining, where they're talking about him bringing his girlfriend or whatever to Langford's uh, weekend house or whatever it is. The fact that it was just presented as though it were another scene in the movie, like there was no cinematic flourishes to indicate that it was a hallucination or a fantasy or whatever, took me like one or two times to realize, oh, okay, this isn't happening. They're obviously not engaging at this regard. And I kind of quickly realized like, oh, like this actually makes the whole thing feel even more unhinged, because you're viewing these delusions in the same way that uh, Pupkin is viewing these delusions, as though they are wholly real and at equal authority and caliber of genuineness to the rest of what's happening in the movie. And I thought that was kind of a brilliant way to do it, to just like drop, it's not just him talking to the cardboard cutout uh, of Jerry Lewis's character. It's like, no, like there's straight up moments where he thinks he's engaging. And like that first one when they're having the dinner, like I thought the break of that was really great, where you're cutting back and forth between Jerry Lewis and De Niro talking, and then all of a sudden it's just De Niro talking and just De Niro talking. And
Right.
I thought that was really kind of a cool way to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think visually, I thought this movie was really strong. I think it's an interesting counterpoint to both Mean Streets and Raging Bull, where the camera is always moving, it's always roving, it's always on the prowl in Mean Streets, and to a lesser extent, Raging Bull. But here it's pretty static and fixed, and you like it would be on a talk show. And so the sets have to do a lot of the heavy lifting, and I thought the sets here were fantastic and just vibrant and colorful. And whether you've got Pupkin in his basement, or they're having the dinner with the tied up Jerry Langford at Sandra Bernhardt's character Masha, her house with all the candles, or the studio itself with those crazy multicolored curtains. I just think really effective set design and intentional camera work that was different stylistically enough from those other two movies to, yeah, just make this feel fresh and different, even if it was maybe less kinetic in its camera movements.
Yeah, for me, these this movie had the tension, like I mentioned, but I really didn't get. I kind of had to piece together more than feel the danger of De Niro's character. And even after the kidnapping, I didn't think the danger was there. So the tension for me wasn't really the danger of De Niro's character. It was more interested to see how all of um, the various pushes and pulls in play, especially after the kidnapping, when it's like, is the network going to air this? Are they going to acquiesce? Are they going to put it on? I thought those scenes were very interesting to me because and said the most about just, I don't know, corporatism and fame and that type of stuff in America. And I almost got almost a little bit of a network, almost a little bit of like Dr. Strangelove vibe from those executives of just this weird, like, are we really talking about this? You know what I mean? Like, is this really
Mhm.
being considered? And like, it was being considered very earnestly. So I really liked those scenes a lot with all the network people trying to figure out how to handle this and going through the logistics of what it would mean. Well, if we do this and he holds him for this amount of time, we actually do have to air this thing. We can't actually not. And so I really appreciated that. I did still like, even though I'm saying I didn't feel the fear from De Niro. It's not even really an indictment of anything that character does in the movie, because as much as it can kind of be maybe easy either after the movie or during the movie to think of those scenes where he's fantasizing about, he's got cardboard cutouts and he's going through the motions with them, and he has the obvious conversations he's having in his head with those characters that are given visually. I do like that point, Dustin, you make. Like, that was cool to kind of literally have those scenes where there's cardboard cutouts and then fully realized scenes without any like, oh, Stardust, this is actually a dream.
Mhm.
That was a nice trick of movie making that I enjoyed kind of being a part of. And but the danger, I guess all that is to say, like when he's yelling at his mom at home and he's got all these things set up, it really was a little bit more of that sadness that I had for De Niro, his character, more than feeling on edge about what might happen violence wise. I did get that from Sandra Bernhard's character,
Mhm.
and I kind of wanted a little bit more of that world, of this world of the people that just stand outside of this building and just, and she's rich, so obviously it's a completely different game than what De Niro's kind of doing. I like the scene where he refuses to leave the payphone, both for its like anachronistic feel and also just the utter desperation of being unwilling to get away from a payphone in New York City. Is like, ooh, my, that's a level of dedication that's amazing. And that it was that level of dedication that you can obviously see leading into the actions and choices that are made that have them kidnap Jerry Langford. But yeah, and now after that, I still didn't kind of like. I think Jerry Langford's response to those two is pretty appropriate. It's really one of, I mean, I something about like comedians being able to pull off certain roles that you just wouldn't necessarily think they could. And I can't really speak to that for Jerry Lewis, as I don't really have, again, too much information with him. But there's a lot of comedians that have done this in a lot of film, where you can tell he's kind of like, I have to do this because I'm here. I am kidnapped, but I know that these two people are buffoons who are obsessed with me and fame and this plan of getting on. I liked how when he had to call a couple times to be like, I'm not bullshitting. This is actually real. But then the danger was really for me all Sandra Bernhard when she was left alone. That's when it started to get
Right.
real interesting. And when they do the jump cut, it's not really a jump cut, but when they cut from him being sort of taped up to him being fully body taped all the way to his mouth, that yeah,
It's pretty
that's when it
chilling,
started to
right?
get.
It's pretty
It's
effective.
yeah, it's pretty effective. It's pretty chilling in this way where there isn't this level of sinister that's at play. but there is the level of obsession that you don't really know what's going to happen when you engage with it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and but there was also a few moments where I just didn't believe really that, like we said, he's likable, but also then very quickly annoying. It kind of shocked me that he got into this summer house with all these butlers and all these maids and all these things, and that scene ended up that way. So that was kind of the one moment in the movie where
I
I
think of
wasn't
it.
really with it.
I think it's almost like I almost think it's maybe it's like not likable is not the right word. He's like it's not that he's likable. He's like he seems harmless in
He
a
seems
way,
harmless. Yeah.
and
Which
that's
does
how I think he got into the house with the butlers and the maids. Is that not that he's bumbling, not that he's like an idiot or anything, but he's like it's like this mix of like harmlessness and confidence and just like enough like a pinch of charisma that he just kind of overwhelms your senses in a way that like just kind of like puts your not puts your guard down but like just pushes past your guard, right? Like where you're like kind of trying to figure out like who is this guy, like what is he, and by the time you're like, wait a minute, I don't think he should be in here. He's up using the bathroom and like putting a record on, and you're like, how do I undo this kind of a thing?
Yeah,
yeah.
and he's wearing a suit. He's wearing a suit, and I think
Yeah,
it speaks to how much a suit can do.
yeah,
I have a couple of friends who wear suits professionally, so they have to wear almost every day, and both of them many times have been like, "You could do almost whatever you want in a suit."
yeah,
I walk
Yeah.
into a building with multiple security guards, and I'm like, I just got to go to the bathroom, and they look at you like, "Yeah, you're wearing a suit, you're fine."
yeah,
And
He gets into the
yeah,
office building way more times than he should have before he's finally, several times violently escorted out. But I think the
hmm
suit and like you guys were both saying, the sincerity and the earnestness go a long way into making him as effective of a stalker as he is.
yeah. So no, I mean, I like this movie. This is a movie that I'd recommend to people. And I really do, like you said, Alex. I really do like that they just give us the full set.
Yeah.
We've been
mhm,
hearing all of this. We've been like, that's a very good and effective choice to essentially bring us into the movie and the narrative in a way that's hard to do, I think, in film. Where it's like, oh no, now this is live and you're gonna watch it, and that like you're gonna watch the whole thing. And yeah, it is like good enough, but not, there's really nothing there, and he doesn't have the relatability to other people to really get into that kind of observational comedy. So it is all, like you said, like stock, childhood sucks type stuff. But yeah, it was weird. Like I wanted a little bit more. There's things I want a little bit more of from De Niro's character, not his performance. But yeah, it was an enjoyable watch. It moved well. I didn't think I knew what was going to happen at every turn. I was like surprised by certain lines and certain movements, and I liked all the receptionist stuff. I liked, like you said, the sets were very good, and Jerry Lewis was great. I think that's kind of one of the it's something that really should be highlighted, is how good that interplay was
mhm.
between the two of them in all the scenes, and all of those trappings of Jerry Langford's life that just seem miserable. And then you have this person idolize all that was wonderful. But I guess that was very surprising to me. When you watch a De Niro and Scorsese movie, I think you're kind of thinking that De Niro will certainly be the star of the show. And I'm not saying he wasn't, but I was consistently surprised at the level of subtlety and nuance and depth that Jerry Lewis's performance of this Johnny Carson type had. That was
Yeah.
really the biggest surprise for me in this movie, that I could not. I see Jerry Lewis's name and I'm kind of like, oh, that's an interesting choice. You know what I mean? I know kind of what this movie's about, but shocking. And then the movie unfolds, and it's Oh, wonderful. Fantastic. Why haven't I seen more of Jerry Lewis in movies, I guess is my question after watching this.
Because I think this is like his only dramatic role that he's ever done.
Yeah. And I don't think he needed
Short
the
of
money.
the day the clown cried, which you probably will never be able to see. That's the one where he was like a clown during the Holocaust, and he wrote and directed it in the 70s, and then it never got released because he was so embarrassed by it. And then I was reading up on it the other night, and he gave a copy of it to the Library of Congress in like 2015, and he said you can't. It was an unfinished copy, and he said you can't release this to the public until 2024, and it screens somewhere this year, but I don't think it's ever going to get a proper release. So
Well, now I'm very
Wild.
intrigued by that.
Yeah. Yeah, Jerry Lewis was great in this, Kyle, and I totally agree about those kidnapping scenes being moments where you really were able to see his dramatic chops shine in just terms of you could see the wheels turning, you could see him, calculating his response and trying to be measured and hide all of his emotions while being in this ridiculous situation. And I do love the way that his you know kind of smug condescension and gives way to pity in those scenes where it's him and Rupert in the car, or later when they're at the country house. But yeah, he's great in this, and I know we've talked about her performance, but I also think Sandra Bernhardt helps elevate this too. I love her in that first scene where she's trapped in Jerry's car. It reminded me of like a zombie scene from 28 Days Later or something, where the way she's just banging at the glass, like absolutely terrifying. And I think she does a great job of making that character scary, but also really funny in a way that works nicely for a dark comedy. I guess the last thought I wanted to share on King of Comedy is just how prescient this movie felt watching it in 2024, where we've had another 40 years of celebrity worship and fan culture and just cultural idolization of criminals, and that whole, kind of what I consider an extended gag sequence at the end where it's revealed that Rupert gets everything he's ever wanted. He becomes a celebrity. He goes to prison and he
Yeah.
comes out and he is on the cover of every entertainment magazine. And, it ends with him, at the start of another set. And I just think that is all very, you know, insightful critique of just the weird way that we relate to media figures in America. And um, I would also recommend this, not just because I think it's a really well done movie, but I think, it's extremely relevant in 2024, which is an achievement for a movie made in 82.
yeah, I feel like this is the only one of the three that I would like. If someone described a movie they were looking for that this fit into, that I would actually recommend watching. I mean, unless you were looking very specifically for like gorgeous boxing cinematography, I can't really in good conscience recommend Raging Bull to someone.
Yeah.
Let's get into our rankings then. That's a perfect segue. Dustin, then Kyle, then I'll go. Give us your three,
Okay.
two, ones.
Yeah, for 3, I think it's an easy Mean Streets. I don't know. I feel like I would have come into this recording saying that 2 would have been King of Comedy and 1 would have been Raging Bull, and that would have been purely for the visuals in Raging Bull. But I feel like talking about King of Comedy more with you guys has like made me like it more and appreciate it more, and like the nuance of it more. And yeah, like I can't believe I said that. Like I'm not a big fan of Jared Lewis, which I'm not, but that had no bearing on the film. And in fact, he was like a very strong part of the film. So I would say 2 for me would be Raging Bull, and then 1 would be King of Comedy. Kyle, how about you?
Yeah, it's the same. Mean Streets 3, King of Comedy 1, and Raging Bull 2. Which is not how normally people would give that information, but that's
Yeah,
how.
I was just gonna say it's the same, and then you list them in a different order.
I'm a contrarian. What can I say?
Yeah,
I
I
want
think
people to feel that tension. I want you to feel
There you
that
go.
tension when you're
There
listening
you
to
go.
me.
There you
I'm on
go.
the edge of my seat just listening to your 3, 2, 1. Yeah, number 3 is got to be Raging Bull for me.
Ooh.
Sorry for what is considered to be a masterpiece.
I love it.
Well, here, like, I'm glad I watched Raging Bull. Are you guys
I
both?
absolutely.
I know Kyle, you had already seen it, but like Alex, are you glad you like checked it off a list? You feel like I'm glad
I'm
I've add this to my filmography
I'm really
viewing.
glad I watched it, and I think after I give it a couple years, I'm genuinely excited to see it again and see if
Yeah.
I have a different emotional reaction. So I think that speaks a lot to just how much is going on in that movie. Number 2 is gonna be King of Comedy, and number 1, I'm coming after Mean Streets, baby.
Oof. Okay. All right.
But
Um,
2 and 1 are pretty close. I would say those are both around 4 stars for me, 4 to 5 movies.
okay.
And I could see King of Comedy, you know, jumping up to number 1 after another rewatch of both.
Okay. Well, before we sign off here, do you wanna tell the listening audience what the next three? It won't be the next episode, but a sooner
Tell them.
episode. Tell them what the
Tell
next
them.
three Scorsese films are going to be.
Yeah, in a couple episodes, you can hear us talk about Silence. Very excited to watch that. Age of Innocence, Scorsese taking a crack at the period chamber drama with Daniel Day-Lewis and Winona Ryder. And for number 3, I am undecided, but it's going to either be Cape Fear, continuing the De Niro
Yeah.
collaboration trend, or Bringing Out the Dead with
Okay.
Nick Cage. And I might solicit your input offline, Dustin and Kyle, to help narrow down that third slot. But those are the potential 3.
Okay. Well, that sounds
Okay.
good. Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
See ya.
Later,
Bye.
y'all.